So Rishi Sunak rejected calls for payouts. Is that the right thing to do?
Yes, I think he answered the question quite well. I think the question was a wasted question. There are 650 people that we send to Parliament on our behalf, and they are the only people who can ask questions at Prime Minister's questions, and this one was completely wasted. I would much rather politicians were focusing on closing the disparities that still exist today, rather than harking on about the past.
Another concern, modern slavery, yeah, you're right, isn't talked. It doesn't really fit the script, does it? And the fact that it's happening mostly in Africa and it's not white people who are the slave keepers or the slave masters. I've got a question for you, though. A lot of people in the Labour side of the House seem to be repeating this message. In fact, Labour MP Bernie Grant founded the Reparations movement. Do you think that the continuing pressure for the UK to pay enormous sums of money, could be trillions of pounds, Albie, will this become part of the Labour manifesto moving forward?
I'd be very surprised to see it become part of the Labour manifesto. I think it's important to say that it's not actually Labour policy at the moment, and I don't think it is something which would be very popular with the public. And of course, if Labour wants to win the next general election, they're going to have to be putting out policies which are popular. And I can't see in these difficult times the idea of paying trillions of pounds to foreign countries as something which is going to resonate with the British public.
It's worth pointing out, Albie, that the UK government, the Treasury, in 1807 paid £20 million, that's about 300 billion in today's money, in reparations to 300 families who lost their plantations. It took until 2015 to pay off those loans. We're currently £2 trillion in debt thanks to lockdowns of the pandemic. The UK simply cannot afford the astronomical sums involved in slavery reparations, can we?
No, the UK absolutely can't afford it, and the UK plays a leading role when it comes to international development around the world, and in many ways that could be seen as a way to develop these countries, which of course suffered as a result of colonialism. You know, it was a very brutal regime that Britain had in the past, but the past. We've moved on since the past, and this country is a very inclusive country, and we do a lot of good in the world.
Why do you think it is, though, Albie, that we don't ever hear, certainly from the left or the Liberal side of the House, of Britain's enormous involvement in ending the slave trade?
That is a very good question. Britain, of course, was one of the first countries to end the slave trade. You mentioned before, spent millions of pounds ending the slave trade. We did an amazing thing, but we did also, at the same time, have the biggest empire in the world. And we were probably one of the biggest slaving countries in the world. So yes, we have done good in the world in terms of ending slavery, but that doesn't take away from the brutality of empire.
Is this about payments or is it about something else? Is it about smearing the Conservative Party as endlessly racist, systemically racist, and continually apologising for the aberrations of British history?
I think it was a misguided question. Rishi Sunak was clearly not going to commit to paying reparations at Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday. It was a silly question which shouldn't have been asked. I would have much rather that the MP in question to have asked about closing the racial disparities which still exist in society today.
OK, joining us now is another guest, Elliot Reid, the founder of the Black History School. Thanks for joining us, Elliot. I don't know how much of that debate you saw. I'd like to put the same question to you. It took until 2015 for the UK to pay off a previous debt in reparations. We paid, in today's money, £300 billion in 1807. We're £2 billion in debt as a nation already. The scale of reparations nowadays would roll into the trillions of pounds. Why would anybody support a policy that would bankrupt the nation?
So first off, I think that you might be looking at reparations as being a way to totally resolve the impact of empire. That's never going to be possible, not just financially, but also emotionally and morally, right? So then the question is, what do we do when it comes to reparations? So by a calculation, if you were to say Jamaica was one of the biggest slave colonies under the British, and to completely eradicate all of their debt would work out to about 8% of the yearly costs of Brexit in the UK. So it's not a huge amount to eradicate debt in a country which got off to an extremely bad start. But the other thing is that when we look at British standards for reparations, so Britain is not foreign to paying reparations, like you mentioned, to previous slave owners, but it's also not foreign to overlooking reparations, for example, which were paid to the victims of the Holocaust and to Israel. And also, it's not foreign to receiving them. It received about 10 billion from Germany after World War I and World War II. So the question is, rather than do we pay reparations, the question is, if so many people have received reparations from the British, why doesn't Jamaica or the West Indies? And because it fits the same category of losses. So that's the question that I would like to propose, and then you might better my understanding of your perspective.
Well, I would simply counter that. Why on earth is it Britain's job to pay off the national debt of Jamaica today for something that was done 2 centuries ago? The people who'd be paying for this, by the way, Elliot, would be British taxpayers. There's no magic money tree. So any paying off of national debt or whatever it is to a foreign nation would mean every single British taxpayer paying, the vast majority of whom, if any at all, had any direct involvement in the slave trade.
But that's the misconception. When you look at the paying of reparations, you think of it as a government or a people paying to another people. In reality, what we do as a people is we personify the country that we live in. So Britain has a past, present and future. We understand the moral debt of the country, which is why, for example, we give thanks for those individuals who are fallen soldiers, who have sacrificed their lives during World War I and World War II. And when we look at reparations, it is one nation paying to another. So, and you could be saying that it's paying for the economic, the human losses. So I don't think that it's as simplistic as you might say as one person paying another. It certainly wasn't the case after World War II and World War I.
OK, Albie, I'd like to quickly allow you to respond to what Elliot's just said.
Look, I'm just not really sure what anything that Elliot has just said does to help people who are suffering from the impact of racial disparities in the United Kingdom today. That is what the government should be focused on. It should be focused on solving the problems for the people of Britain and not people abroad. And I would much rather the conversation moved on to how we can solve the racial disparities that we see in society today, rather than harking back to the past and calling for reparations, which are never going to be paid.